Excellent. Good. Yeah. So I suppose the first thing we would need to ask is the question, of Ian Jury. How widespread are the supporters of Steve and Brendan? And he sent me a message.
In the deserts of Sudan and the gardens of Japan, from Milan to Yucatan, every woman, every man.
Oh, thanks, Ian. That's great. Okay. So that was Ian Jury's opinion of the where all the supporters are from. Okay. And many thanks to Sean, obviously, for doing that one for me. I'll post that later. Yeah, we were chatting about Ian Jury, weren't we?
We were indeed, yes. And
Yeah.
how underrated as a funkster he is.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, for me, like a lot of songs that you listen to, they are just catchy numbers. They're pop tunes. The lyrics don't mean anything. But when it comes to Ian Jury, his lyrics are absolutely fantastic, because I think that's what he did at university. I saw the film. Not Rock and Roller. It was the life story of Ian Jury, wasn't it? What the hell was it called? But brilliant film. Really loved it. With Andrew Serkis played the part of Ian Jury and did it brilliantly. And for anybody he's the guy that does Gollum in Lord of the Rings, isn't he?
Yes, he does.
Yeah,
he does a lot of that live capture animation.
Yeah.
But the thing about Jury as well is that he was poetic, and he had like this real working class poetic voice,
Yep.
Yeah. And then there's all this funk behind him. He's incredible.
The band that he put together were all top musicians, although they were students at the time, But the Blockheads are still going strong. I saw them a few years back in Cheltenham.
Yeah.
Absolutely
that would have been
brilliant.
Something.
Oh yeah, I mean they're into their 50s and 60s now, But yeah, they're still the same lineup. Apart from the lead singer, they had to replace the lead singer, obviously, and they've got a bloke that sounds just like Michael Caine, which just fits the band perfectly,
Yeah, it would. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, so let's just jump straight into what I really wanted to address. You've already had the pleasure of talking with the author of both Convicting Avery and Anatomy of a False Confession, and they are books by
Michael Cicchini. Yeah.
And I've just finished the first book, completely finished it. It was absolutely brilliant. So now started reading. I'm up to about page 40 on the Anatomy of a False Confession. But I wanted to, first of all, look at the last couple of pages of Convicting Avery that I think I sent you. So anyway, I'll pop them up.
Yeah.
They should be ready to go. What I should be doing is my usual, which is just to monitor on my my phone here to make sure that everything is. Oh, goodness, I'll go onto YouTube and all I've got is loads and loads of Stevie Wonder and Level 42. I don't know what I was doing this morning.
You got any Aretha Franklin there?
Well, yeah, I could give her a bit of respect.
Rocksteady is just an exceptional song.
Yeah. No, I did like your Grace.
Grace Jones.
Roll up to the bumper.
Yeah, it's awesome.
that is pretty good. Yeah, I must admit, I do like that one. Am I thinking Grace Jones is actually French?
I don't think she is French.
Oh right, okay.
I could be wrong though. I thought she was English.
Oh right, okay. It's just that I know that she did a version of Libertango by Piazzolla, Astor Piazzolla, who is the South American sort of bandoneon, world famous player. Libertango, it's all about liberty and everything, So he was a he was a right activist as well as a bandonion player.
Yeah. She's actually from Jamaica.
Ah, yes, yes. Originally, yeah.
Yeah.
As usual, would you like would you like to take the honours of reading it, or would you prefer me to?
Sure, I don't mind. Where do you want me to read to?
This page and the next.
Okay, so you're going to scroll down them,
Yeah. I won't make you do it by memory. actually, that might be quite fun. No, I'm okay.
I'd need a few drinks for that.
Yes.
Okay. While Avery has real hope, Brendan Dassey has results. Like Avery, Dassey lost in his appeals in the Wisconsin state court system. However, Dassey's post-conviction counsel, Laura Ryder and Robert Dvorak, achieved success in the federal district court for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. On August the 12th, 2016, the federal court issued its decision in the case of Dassey versus Dittman, the warden at the prison, where it addressed the issue of Dassey's coerced confession.
Yep.
To recap, Dassey's state trial court judge in the Wisconsin Court of Appeals had ruled that Dassey's confession was voluntary and therefore admissible at his trial. The federal court disagreed, despite the incredibly high standard imposed on defendants under the poorly named Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, EDPA. The federal court held that the Wisconsin Court of Appeals decision was not merely wrong, but more important, was an unreasonable application of clearly established federal law. More specifically, the federal court held that Mark Wiegert's and Tom Fassbender's repeated false promises, when considered in conjunction with all relevant factors, most especially Dassey's age, intellectual deficits, and the absence of a supportive adult, rendered Dassey's confession involuntary under the 5th and 14th Amendments. This decision was a serious blow to the state of Wisconsin, particularly after what Making a Murderer has revealed about its law enforcement agents, prosecutors and judges. As a result, the state had only two real choices. One, initiate proceedings to retry Dassey, but without the coerced confession. Or two, appeal the federal court ruling to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. Much like Dassey did when presented with the two options by Wiegert and Fassbender, the state selected the lesser of two evils. It picked option 2 and appealed the federal court's decision. Other than a handful of prosecutors and law enforcement agents working in the state of Wisconsin, few people on the planet actually believed that Dassey's confession was true or even voluntary. If truth or voluntariness were the issues to be decided at the Seventh Circuit, Dassey would win the appeal hands down. Instead, given the incredibly high hurdle that EDPA imposes on state court defendants who seek relief within the federal court system, the issue will more likely come down to this. When the Wisconsin Appellate Court denied Dassey's appeal, asking it to suppress his so-called confession, was its decision merely wrong, or was it so wrong that no reasonable judge could have reached that decision? It seems odd that Dassey's entire life should hinge not on whether the state appellate court got it wrong, but rather the degree to which it got it wrong. This bizarre scenario seems more like the product of a Twilight Zone episode than of a modern system of criminal justice. The linguistics of the whole thing, whether the appellate court was merely wrong or so wrong, reminds me of the comic strip where the trial judge, a cat, asks the defendant, a dog, whether he pleads guilty, or really, really guilty. The difference between Dassey's case and the comic strip, of course, is that the seemingly meaningless distinction in Dassey's case actually makes all the difference in the world. Once the Seventh Circuit decides the state's appeal, the losing party will have the option of appealing to the US Supreme Court. However, that is not an appeal as a matter of right. In other words, it would be up to the US Supreme Court to decide if it wishes to accept the appeal. While that brings us up to date on the Avery and Dassey cases, what about the viewers who can't get enough of Making a Murderer? On this front, the news is far more certain. At the time of this writing, Netflix has announced that season 2 is forthcoming, As a result, Wisconsin's criminal justice system will remain in the national spotlight for at least a little while longer.
I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed that sort of last chapter of the book, you know.
Yeah.
And you know the whole idea, you know, the cat asking the dog, "You're either guilty, really guilty, or really, really guilty." I mean, it's just, it's ridiculous. And of course, the title of the book is, sorry, let me just get
Convicting
it.
Avery.
And the bizarre laws. Sorry, yeah, convicting Avery.
Yeah.
The bizarre laws and broken system behind making a murderer, and this is the anatomy of a false confession, which I've been reading,
Yeah.
and of course just finished. And I mean, this is some book. This is, my goodness.
Yeah.
That was 300 odd pages, and I mean, just to give you an example, you know, when you actually look at the amount of words per page,
Yeah.
compared with, you know, convicting Avery, which is, you know,
Slightly bigger.
slightly
Yeah.
smaller type, you know, and the same
Yeah.
with the anatomy of the false confession. But I know you've had, you know, that's not too bad at all, and I don't mean bad in a nasty way. Just, you know, there is so much to get through in Richard Leo's book. You know, it's one of the longest books I think I've ever read.
Yeah.
Apart from maybe some of the Harry Potter books, you know, but so obviously you've got this as I've said to you, I got in touch with Richard Leo and asked him about the for want of a better word, what I've often described as being the Holy Grail. There's no DNA evidence at the moment that convicts Brendan, and sadly at the moment we have no DNA evidence that acquits him, do we? You know, we do, in Brendan's case, we're still waiting on Zellner to get, you know, the all the testing done, and I would imagine that, you know, pinpointing whose actual blood is on the back of the RAV4 when it's not Stephen Brendan's, that will go a huge way towards you know, getting the pair of them released. But I just feel so aggrieved that, you know, these Seventh Circuit and then the Supreme Court, they didn't bite the bullet and actually do something about the system. Am I right in saying that the, you know, this obviously the Supreme Court didn't take the case, and am I right in saying that the Supreme Court hadn't looked at the issue of voluntary confessions for something like 50 years?
No, that's right. I think the last time that they had a real good look was, now it's over 50 years, with Henri Galt.
Yeah.
You know, I think that the Supreme Court missed a huge opportunity to, you know, over the years they've cautioned juveniles, right? They've cautioned juveniles should be treated with special care, that youth are vulnerable. This is why juveniles are statistically overrepresented in false confession cases. Most of us now, we all know that. We all know that. But the issues that they could have grappled with and brought into, you know, the 21st century for juvenile justice was Miranda.
Yep.
You know, and the you know, do the intellectually limited fully grasp their Miranda rights? I would say no. But also the fact, you know, they talk about the special care, and with Brendan's case, it was an ideal vehicle for them to look at interrogation tactics, right? So these tactics that are built for, you know, adults, and they're seemingly at odds with this position of special care that I think the Supreme Court has in order to protect children. There's a couple of other things too. You know, they could bring the psychological science to the voluntariness standard. You know, and I think it's Rovner at the Seventh Circuit in her dissent. Excuse me. She talks about that. You know, in bringing, you know, neuroscience and advancements in juvenile neuroscience, and for the Supreme Court to adopt, that scientific advancement, like they had done with Roper v. Simmons with the death penalty, like they had done with Atkins v. Virginia with intellectual disabilities. They had the perfect vehicle in Brendan's case to look at, those types of issues.
Sure. Is that what when Kathleen Zellner is reviewing the dissenting opinion at the time of Judge Hamilton, and he talks about the fact that this court or their job is not to look at scholarly best practices, and Kathleen Zellner goes, "Really? Why not?" Is that what she's referring to? That particularly this, the whole sort of, as you say, the sort of psychology that let's put it this way, that the part of the sort of appeal stage that Richard Leo was particularly involved in.
Perhaps, but I think when we got to the Seventh Circuit, when we got to the en banc, a lot of those issues had fallen away. It was on the voluntariness of Brendan's confession. So even at that stage, his innocence or guilt wasn't a question. So there's a justice system on a federal review where innocence or guilt is not the question. That's astounding. And a reflection on the type of laws, But yeah, I think when we're looking at Hamilton in particular, we can look at the type of analysis that he undertook, and his reasoning was something like that. The federal habeas corpus statute required deference to the state court opinion under review. So he couldn't look too deeply into Dassey's confession itself. All he could do was see whether the state court gave it reasonable review. And because he believed that the state court did give it reasonable review, the law required deference. Yeah.
Outstanding, isn't it? I mean, quite rightly, as Dr. Silkman has pointed out there, I was going to ask you about this. Obviously, the problem number one for Brendan is going to trial and being found guilty. And it's ridiculous that, and as I say, going back to this question of what I would call the Holy Grail, I have never yet come across any case in America, and in fact, probably not worldwide, where somebody has been found guilty based only on a confession. Then experts looked at that confession, have said that clearly this confession is coerced, although both Lawrence Wright and Richard Leo say that it's not their job to determine the voluntariness of a confession. Am I right? That's up to the court to decide. So because the court decided that the confession was voluntary.
Yeah. And that's
have I got that bit right?
That's correct. And it's a fact finder's decision to look at the truth of a confession. When I spoke with Dr. Leo, one of the things that we did touch on was the idea of the voluntariness. And he finds that that standard particularly troubling, and I agree. And it's something that I've always had an issue with because it's so open-ended, right? So a judge can interpret it in any way he likes. So a judge can always come up with a reason to say it's voluntary or involuntary, and the question is, what does voluntary actually mean? Because you have some people who have weaker wills, some people have impairments, some people have stronger wills. And one of the things that Dr. Leo had stressed was that perhaps it should be a reliability standard and not this so-called philosophical voluntary standard. And I think there's something to be said for that, because we see the split in the Seventh Circuit on 4-3 on the en banc. It's obviously something that's so widely open to interpretation that it's such a broad standard. Hard to find justice within that.
Okay, and so going forward, to the appeal stage, obviously we had Dr. Leo come forward and give a lot of testimony, which was, it's all based on what he's written in his book. And am I right in thinking that Joseph Buckley also issued a report? And one of Richard Leo's jobs was to actually look at what Joseph Buckley had written. And I intend to go over that. But am I right in thinking that since Making a Murder came out, Joseph Buckley has actually gone on to publicly say that even he thought that what Regan and Fassbender did was wrong?
Absolutely. Joseph Buckley was brought in and testified to the fact during Wiegert. Obviously, Wiegert was Reed certified, right? So, and he testified to that fact during Dassey's trial. But when asked by the prosecutor to support his credibility, he called upon Joseph Buckley, who, as we know, is president of the Reed Company. I think he founded it somewhere in the 1940s after.
Yeah.
And I believe he was from Northwestern, funny enough. But,
yeah. It started off with somebody called Jane, was it? Somebody, Brian Jane, and then it was Inbar, and then Reed, and then Buckley. Is that? Oh, I got that right. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So, we know that Buckley viewed the interrogation videos, and he wrote a report concluding that Wiegert acted with the appropriate standard of care and did follow the standards. But you're right, because in recent years, Buckley has testified that the kind of high-pressure tactics portrayed in the documentary stray beyond what his company considers acceptable, right? So the company also cautions that care must be taken when interrogating juveniles. Now, recently, on my first episode of the second season of the podcast, which is due to drop this weekend, if I can get to it, is I have a great conversation with Professor Brian Galini. I should say Dean Brian Galini. Right. And we talk about Reed in depth, and Brian Galini was so entrenched in Brendan's injustice and what have you, that he went and he did the Reed training. And, the biggest problem that they find in these false confession cases is that it's not so much that people use the Reed technique, but they skip steps. Yeah. So by skipping steps, they're weaponizing this technique. And particularly when it's, you're interrogating juveniles and people with social and intellectual limitations, then they're going to be more susceptible, particularly if you don't take them through the steps. But the thing with Reed, as we know, is that it's very, very good at eliciting confessions and just as good as eliciting false confessions. And I've seen recently, actually, that Reed have done a series of videos on YouTube. It's almost like a PR exercise on the Reed technique. They're quite interesting, and I can't help but have an unhealthy cynicism, I should say, when I'm watching it. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's such in America. This whole idea of producing this sort of lie detector test, this for them, the holy grail would be some technique, some piece of equipment, something whereby they could ask somebody a question, and a bit like in Harry Potter, if they had some veritaserum that they could give to people, and they had to then tell the truth, that would be worth billions, wouldn't it? And I think there is a certain amount of competitiveness, isn't there, in America, amongst the people creating these sort of, truth machines or lie detector tests, the whole brain fingerprinting thing.
I think with when you're looking at behavioural analysis, which is at the core of what Reed is about, so, they conduct a behavioural analysis interview first, and then they make a decision as to whether or not that goes into the 9-step interrogation process.
Right, yeah.
But I think we find, particularly with Brendan, is that in Marionette, in the back of that squad car, you have Brendan. They start off with the behavioural analysis interview, and they quickly fast forward that bad boy into an interrogation, into a Reed interrogation, and by listening to it, it's got all the hallmarks of the interrogation. You can hear the different steps as O'Neill is going through them, you know. But yeah.
Yeah, interestingly though, as Cicchini points out, although he was interviewed at Marinette, there was nothing then that Brendan acquiesced to and was browbeaten over that caused them to arrest him there and then. It was another
No, that's
2
right.
or 3 months, wasn't it? There wasn't
Yeah.
really that much sort of damning against Brendan. And of course, that's when it's sort of freshest in his memory. But just the fact that they sort of browbeat him. I mean, at one point, did they say to him, look, all the other kids saw the photographer. Are you saying you never saw you must have seen the photographer?
Yeah.
So he goes, well, okay, I must have seen the photographer, you know?
And that's exactly around the 21 minute mark.
Yeah.
Not to say that I haven't pored over this many times, but around the 21 minute mark, O'Neill comes back into the car, and that's when he starts with that. So this is the misclassification error coming into play as well. So they've done a behavioural analysis interview, so to speak. The misclassification error comes in, and then they embark on the 9-step interrogation technique. But out of the gate, O'Neill is aggressive.
Oh, yeah.
So you're exactly right. They're saying, you know, the driver and the kids on the bus, they all saw Teresa. You saw Teresa, didn't you? You saw Teresa, didn't you? And you hear Brendan faintly saying, but I was speaking to Blaine. I might have been speaking to Blaine or whatever. He obviously didn't see Teresa, and you see by the end of that interaction, they have him agreeing that he saw Teresa. And I think the suggestibility of Brendan is so obvious to them there. But when you listen to that interrogation on the whole, and I call every single interaction with Uyghur and Fassbender and O'Neill an interrogation, and every single one of them, he should have been read his Miranda rights and taken through and explained what each of those rights meant. But anyway, that's another therapy session. But when you listen to that interrogation in the back of the squad car, he doesn't, if you listen closely, he doesn't say anything to actually incriminate himself.
Yeah.
So Uyghur and Fassbender go off. They go off on their merry way until they're brought into Kayla Avery's universe, and it takes on different legs from there.
Sure. Obviously, the Court of Appeal was the appeal that Brendan had was in front of obviously Jerome Fox. Then the case would have been looked at by the Court of Appeals, who just rubber stamped it basically. Have I got that bit right?
Yeah, for sure. They didn't even publish an opinion.
No.
You know, they couldn't even do that for a 16-year-old kid's life. But yeah, I mean, at the core of this, right? So you had Ralph Skyjalski, I think that's how you pronounce his name. I always struggle with it. He waives Brendan's preliminary hearing, which it was so important because the state would have had to have presented evidence to show that Brendan Dassey had committed a crime. And apart from the statement, of course, there was no evidence, right? So it's very unlikely it would have proceeded. So then he leaves after, I think it's half a day or something like that. And he's commented to the local news. And then you've got Kaczynski who comes in and waives Brendan's Miranda claims at the suppression hearing, which again is a massive, massive misstep. And I talk about all of this with Dean Galini in the podcast this weekend. It's all about the waivers. You just had them. And Kaczynski also could have appealed the waiver of the preliminary hearing, but he didn't do that either. You know, but I will give Fremgen his due. When Fremgen and Edelstein came on, they did appeal the suppression hearing, I think it was, because, you know, obviously Kaczynski made an absolute balls of the suppression hearing.
Okay. And then at some point, obviously the Supreme Court decided not to look at it at all, didn't they?
Yeah, the Supreme Court didn't take the case, and they didn't even issue a dissent. So, there was nothing forthcoming from the Supreme Court. And I think, once it had to go to the Supreme Court, the chances were very, very slim. I think once we had the en banc decision, that was the end of that habeas journey for Brendan.
But obviously, at some point, Judge Duffin gets involved and looks at Brendan's case, and the episode of Making a Murder is called "A Legal Miracle." What would be your interpretation as to the wording of that particular episode? Why is Brendan's Duffin decision a legal miracle?
Because it's the habeas corpus.
Yeah.
To be successful with a habeas petition is extremely rare. And the fact that, he didn't find on ineffective assistance, he would have, leaned in more towards the Sullivan, the Strickland, rather than Kyler versus Sullivan. But, he basically said, these repeated false promises, in conjunction with other relevant factors, Dassey's age, his intellectual deficits, the absence of a supportive adult, all rendered Brendan's confession involuntary under the 5th and 14th Amendments. It was a strong statement. I think, I'm not sure of the exact sort of percentage of habeas petitions that are granted, but, EDPA's made the whole idea of successful habeas petitions very, very rare. Well, has contributed to it,
Yeah, because as that last chapter of Chechenian's book, it wasn't a question of how wrong was the decision in Brendan's case. It was just was it so bad that no other judge in the country could have come to that conclusion. So I accept that that's part of the sort of the legal miracle involving Brendan, but I also think, as I say, and I sorry to keep harping on about this, but I have never yet come across any case in America where somebody has been released purely, not through any DNA evidence, not through any real perpetrator being found, purely on the science of a false confession. And I actually got in touch with Saul Kassan and asked him about the Hugh Burton case and Dr. Leo, and they both say no. Those I would not say those are examples, because I think there was another person, a possible perpetrator that was identified, and therefore that was part of the reason. But I can't help thinking that in Brendan's case, had the Duffin decision been accepted by the Seventh Circus, or taken on by Scotus, and looked at Brendan's case. I know I deliberately say that, not because I'm misspelling them accidentally, but I think the Seventh Circus, I remember referring at the time to them when he won his first round, and they asked, could Brendan be released on bond, and they even denied that, and my choice of language was the worst you'll ever hear when I was chatting with the dude about it, So I always call them a circus, and I always refer to Scooters because apparently that's a Muppet character.
Yes.
So maybe.
Yeah.
Look, what I wrote to what I want to Richard Leo was that, I'll just read it out. Can I just do this? Hi, Richard. Many thanks for getting back to me again. Here's one of the articles that I read about Hugh Burton, and a screenshot of a paragraph from the article. Brendan's Dassey case went all the way to SCOTUS, I pronounced it right there. Ultimately, they, somewhat cowardly, I believe, declined to look at it, despite 6 amicus briefs. Had they looked at Brendan, and had experts like yourself give testimony about false confessions, I believe that, had Brendan rightfully been exonerated, it would have greatly advanced American justice. Because I can't help thinking that it would have been the first case ever where somebody was released based purely on the experts. In other words, based purely on what Kathleen Zellner is saying about the fact that, why not avail yourself of the best scholarly practices,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just carry on? Because he did reply to me. Um, um, as I say, sorry, let me carry on. As I said, Brendan was found guilty solely on his confession, as the article about Hughes says. Sorry, no, that's all to do with Hugh Burton. Yeah, the episode of Making a Murderer Series 2, which deals with Judge Dufferin's decision to grant Brendan habeas corpus relief, is entitled A Legal Miracle. Let's see, what did... Okay, so I got a reply back from Richard about thanks. I don't know what it means to say there is an exoneration based on the science of false confessions. Many other false confessors were exonerated prior to Hugh Burton. So your question to Saul makes no sense to me. What am I missing? Where have I put it? I sent you that much stuff. I don't know if you remember. I sent you a whole load of stuff. So I'm struggling to find it here. Sorry. Here we go. This was really the sort of crux of the matter that I wanted to sort of ask you about, because it's the sort of, where do you go, and how do you try and correct this this mess? Richard Leo wrote, "Thanks, Paul. I just don't agree that Hugh Burton was the first person ever exonerated on the basis of the scientific analysis of interrogation." He put, "That is 100% false." But then he said, "Also, the US Supreme Court takes 1/10 of 1% of the cases that come to it, and their purpose is to make and interpret law, not to reverse injustices."
Yeah.
So, on the one hand, I take that as kind of saying, that, well, why take the case to the Supreme Court in the first place? That was my first question. But then it then carries on. But then he says, "I wish they would have taken his case too, and am deeply, deeply troubled by the US criminal justice system's response to Brendan's case and the fact that he remains unjustly incarcerated." But to me, there seems to be a little bit of a contradiction. And I just wonder if that was being echoed throughout the sort of legal world. How do you get justice for Brendan?
Yeah.
It seems to me as if the judges can just shift the goalposts anytime they like. But I'm just wondering what's the best sort of tactic then? We went down this habeas corpus route with Judge Duffin's decision. Excellent. Then Hamilton comes along and puts an end to that. But then reading what Richard Leo's saying, it was almost as if that there was no point in appealing to the Supreme Court in the first place.
Yeah. I know what you're saying. I think, one of the things that we've learned over the last 5 years is that the US criminal justice system values finality above anything else. And what that basically means is that preserving a conviction takes precedence over the seeking of the truth. And that seems to be the common theme all the way up to the Supreme Court. It's I think we knew once it was going to the Supreme Court that it wouldn't be heard, but there was this slither of hope, because one of the reasons the Supreme Court does take cases is when there's a split in the circuit.
Right.
The circuit, and you couldn't get more definitive than a 4-3 split. And obviously in the way that they were interpreting EDPA, but I think I wonder why the en banc decided to take and rehear the case. And the only thing that I can think of, and I've thought of this a lot, is that the other judges felt that Williams and Rovner got it wrong. So But when you look at the en banc decision, when you look at what Hamilton said, I mean, they evaluate the confession by considering the totality, right? The totality of Brendan's circumstances, but it didn't account for how those factors interact. So they said, yes, there are the existence of these specific factors. But then they go on to say that, he wasn't subjected to physical force. Now, all of their arguments, all of their statements, people like ourselves could actually stand in front of them and give them a bit of a run for their money, because it's like, first it noted that Dassey was not subject to physical force or mental exhaustion. Well, we know that, and science and modern, so-called modern day interrogation techniques will tell you that physical force is no longer needed to elicit a confession, right? So Absolutely. He wasn't handcuffed, he wasn't yelled at or beaten into submission. Yeah, okay, but that still doesn't mean he's not coerced. Yeah. Even Miranda, over at the Miranda court 52 years ago, understood that subtle psychological approaches can be inherently coercive. But we've got this Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals majority who refuse to acknowledge that. I think they said that there's some factors that would support finding that his confession was involuntary. And these are all totality of circumstances factors. So you've got his age, his IQ, and they admitted that the confession contained inconsistencies, and that the interrogators gave broad assurances that honesty would produce leniency. But that wasn't enough for them. And I think what it is that the majority just didn't have the balls. They fell in line with that deference to the state court, and that was it.
Yeah, I mean it's and I don't want to seem as if I'm criticizing people or having a go at them, but to me this whole system is just such an absolute mess. Trying to get any kind of justice for Stephen Brendan, and I do sometimes get the sense that that as far as some people are concerned, Stephen and Brendan, they're quite happy to have them locked up. The end justifies the means, in the fact that we're not going to upset the apple cart. We're not just going to give in to all these do-gooders that have pointed out how bad the system is. Which brings me on to sort of almost like a final question here, and that is this quote from Steve Glynn at the back end of season 1, where he says, very candidly, I think, he says, everyone seems still to be playing this the normal, conventional, conservative way, which is that if the system has the right lawyers and if the lawyers do the right job, then justice will be obtained. At what point do people start questioning that whole framework?
Well, that in itself is an anomaly, because, having the right lawyers, if you're indigent and you're in Wisconsin and you're a 16-year-old kid, then you don't get the right lawyer. You get an overworked public defender, or you get, a political appointee like Kaczynski was, that ensures that the rest of that statement just doesn't happen for somebody like Brendan Dassey. So how do they address that? You just need to look at the reforms that people are pushing in places like Maryland, and you see the actions of the governor of Michigan, I think it is, Governor Whitmer, Governor Wolf as well in Pennsylvania, who's really taken a run with John Letterman, his lieutenant, in terms of granting commutations and clemency. Wisconsin recently, I think it was yesterday, I listened to the budget with Governor Evers, and he spoke in depth about criminal reform. And I need to go back over it and dissect it in what way could that influence or impact, Brendan or Stephen. But particularly I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but, I think there's around 127 juvenile lifers in Wisconsin.
Wow.
Brendan Dassey being one of them.
Yeah.
Now, they still have life without parole, but I counter Brendan's sentence may as well have been that. It's a de facto life without parole sentence, but the whole idea of looking at mandatory minimum sentencing for juveniles and let's do something retroactively with that, I don't know. I the system itself, that sounds like this idea of what should happen for people in the system that Stephen Glynn is talking about, but it's not the reality. We've seen that on a major scale.
Sure. I mean, I do have a certain hope that Evers is the sort of person that will start to do the right thing. I must admit, I'm like Millbilly. I think that Millbilly asked, "Do you think Brendan's
Yes.
lawyers are waiting to see what happens in Stephen's case?" Because that, to me, would be the thing that they, they can keep moving the goalposts as much as they like, but ultimately, Kathleen Zellner's going to have them by the short and curlies, and they're going to start squealing. And
I
hopefully
spoke with
then.
someone recently. Yes. Sorry to interrupt you, but
No, you're fine.
I spoke with someone recently who I won't name because it's my second episode. But
Well, I was going to get up to that, but I wasn't going to let the cat out of the bag or anything like that. But you did get in touch with me and say, "Oh, I'm lining up my next guest," and I said,
Yes.
"Oh, go on, tell us who it is." "No, I can't." "Oh, go on, you can trust me." "Oh, okay."
I just like to keep it secret until they come out. I don't know why. It's stupid. I'm 51. Yeah. What the hell? But one of the things that I learned was that as a Brendan supporter, obviously a Stephen supporter, that goes without saying when I talk about Kathleen Zellner, but as a Brendan supporter, we should be very, very conscious and aware and interested in what is happening with Kathleen Zellner's appeal for Stephen, because any newly discovered evidence can be used for Brendan, and that can take him back into state court. Once we're back in state court, that also raises again on newly discovered evidence ineffective assistance of counsel claims. So, yes, we need to be really conscious of what's going to happen there, because, it can absolutely impact Brendan.
Okay, so thanks very much. So I think we've more or less covered everything I wanted to cover, apart from we always, whenever me and the dude used to have a little chinwag, we'd always finish off with something a little bit more light-hearted, a little bit of fun. So as you know, the dude, and I've got his T-shirt on today,
Yes.
The Dude Advocacy Foundation.
Brilliant.
And one of the dude's favourite subjects, of course, was geography. So I've got a couple of geography questions for you, okay? And I know how much you are an admirer of sport.
I have to tell you, the geography is my worst trivia pursuit.
Oh dear!
Piece. Yeah.
Oh dear! Oh well. Okay. Well, let's see if you can get somewhere near this one then.
Okay.
The most famous cricketer of all time is W.G. Grace, who lived obviously in the previous century. We've only got old photographs of him, the big guy with the beard, But he played for, as I say, he played county cricket for Gloucestershire. Gloucestershire county cricket. Obviously, you've got the county of Gloucestershire, which I'm from originally. Gloucestershire County Cricket Club go round Gloucestershire playing various games at like Cheltenham and Gloucester and Morton in the Marsh, Stow-on-the-Wold, all the sort of iconic places around the Cotswolds. But their home ground isn't actually in Gloucestershire. And I wondered if you know, where is the Gloucestershire County Cricket Club home ground?
Okay. I've never been asked a more random question in my
life. Good.
But I'm trying to think why you would ask me that, right?
Yeah.
So if it's something to do with me being born in Bristol.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, It's Bristol is actually in the county of Avon.
Yes.
And it's weird that Gloucestershire play in Bristol, but I suppose I can understand locate there because you've got such a big population. I don't know what the population of Bristol is, but it's several million, isn't it? Another thing, the current world #1 snooker player is Judd Trump. Where does Judd Trump come from?
Well, if it's Bristol again, it's not
Yeah, well done. and third for the full clean sweep. Okay.
What's my prize though? Like,
Well, yeah. More text messaging from me. So the Bears are currently top of the rugby Premiership here in the UK. In England, sorry, the English Premiership rugby. The Bears are top, but where do the Bears come from?
Bristol.
Correct. 3 out of 3. Well done.
Paul, you make them so hard.
I know. I actually used to go down to Bristol, and as I went there as an 8-year-old the first time and played at Oldbury Court, which is like an area of Bristol, at their music festival, and played there for about 4 or 5 years on the trot. It was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I think the last time I was in Bristol was about 1989, 1990.
Wow. Yep.
And we were dropping my brother off, who had come over to visit because I was living in London for a couple of years. And my brother was going to see Portsmouth play.
Oh, right.
And I remember dropping him off, and we went up to Bath.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bath is nice, I must admit. When I was gigging with the band, and you're going obviously across to Wales a lot from Cheltenham, we used to do a lot of gigs in Wales, in the sort of Rhondda Valley area. As far as Swansea, obviously you go through Bristol, but not actually into Bristol. But I remember a few years back we went down on a really nice summer's day to Bath, and I got a stunning picture of the Royal Crescent there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful spot.
Yeah.
It's like Devon. You can't help but get a good picture,
Yeah. Yep. And a final comment from Millbilly. Absolutely.
Yes.
Although, if you've ever watched the film Snatch, it would be, you mean proper fucked? Right. Anyway, I'm going to say cheerio and thank you once again for joining me, Tracy. Absolute pleasure. Look forward to talking about your because that's what the Advocacy Foundation is all about, encouraging people to talk about the case. I think it's we don't live in America. We can't vote on American politics. We can't sort of do anything with that regards, but we can keep talking about the case and. Yes, crocodile. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
But
that's exactly it.
Didn't fit the Bristol link.
What, Bradman?
Bradman, yeah.
Bradman,
The Don. He finished with an average in Test matches of something like 99.9 average. He averaged 100 every time he played a game.
Cricket here is massive. Like, as the seasons change, there's a sport. So we go from footy into cricket.
Yeah.
And growing up in Australia, like the sound of there's a cricket commentator. He's passed now, but his
Richie
name's
Benner. Yeah.
That sound is ingrained in my psyche, almost to the point of being traumatized, because all my dad and brothers did was watch, cricket through summer. So the moustache of Merv Hughes and Dennis Lilly, all of those cricketers that I grew up on. But
Richie Benno would commentate on Australian TV in Australian summer for for the Test matches going on in Australia, and then in your winter he would come to the UK and he would commentate in the UK and just absolutely brilliant. We kind of part own him, because he was such a legend here in the UK as well. So Richie
I
Bennett.
think
And
I think you own a lot of Australians if we take it all the way back.
well, I think, yeah, I think we do actually. Yeah, I think you're quite right there.
There were a few boats involved, but yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Anyway, enjoy the rest of your evening, Tracy. Look forward to you spilling the beans on who your guests are in your upcoming podcasts, and they are on the 6th hour, aren't they?
They certainly are. They certainly
Yeah.
are. So I've got one due to drop. It probably be the weekend now, just because I'm preparing for another interview early next week. So I get
Yeah.
caught in a cycle of editing and preparing at the same time.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I'm really excited to share what I'm learning, and
Yeah.
that's the whole thing behind the podcast is
Yes.
this incredible opportunity to be educated by people who are experts in the field. They've been involved in the case, are involved in the case. They've been part of amicus briefs and so on. I get to share that education with anyone who listens. So it's just a win-win.
Yeah. If you could maybe, probably be quicker, if you could just send me a link when we finished, and I'll pop it in the description
Yeah, no problem. That'd be
to
lovely.
the
Thank
to the
you.
6th hour, and we know why it's called the 6th hour.
We do now, don't we, Paul?
We do,
Paul,
yes.
you
And
do, yes.
the reason is because what was the reason? No, it was obviously he wanted to. Is this going to take much longer? Because I've got a project due, and this is far more important than listening to you pair waffling on.
Yeah, God love him. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Thank you,
thanks very much
everybody.
for having me.
You're very welcome, and thank you to everybody who joined us in the chat. Great as usual. I'll say cheerio. Bye for now. See you again soon.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye. Bye.